bad, poor, good, rich people feel guilty about yourself and try to be better. I mean, sometimes it's easy to just do a sermon. I don't think that's the point of the sermon. I don't think that the point of sermons ever is to shame one group and saying, well, you're bad, so you need to be better. But I think that there is sort of a bigger picture which brings us back to our mission statement. And that is, so if you remember our mission statement, it's connecting upward, inward, and outward. So we're to connect with God, we're to connect with each other in Christian community, we're to connect with the world in a way that we become a blessing. And so basically that mission statement comes out of the great commandment, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. And the Great Commission, go therefore and make disciples to all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you. So connecting upward, connecting inward, connecting outward. But sometimes we can be involved in church and we can know about God, we can sit next to each other, and we can know we're supposed to make a difference in the world, but somehow we lose our connections. And we start snoozing through all those things that we're meant to be getting involved in and engaged in. And so this is one of those terms that is going to start at the beginning of Genesis, and we're just going to keep on going through. But I think just sort of a quick review of who are we created to be, and why do we end up forgetting who we're created to be? Because really I think the whole point of this is not to shame or guilt or tell you need to be a better person. The point is more like having that warning light come on the dashboard of your car and say there's something that's not right here. And I'm not connected in the ways that I'm supposed to be connected, and to figure out what's missing. So we began with Genesis, and were Adam and Eve initially connected upward, inward, and outward? Yes, very well. There were no barriers. They were walked with God in the garden. There was no shame, no guilt disconnecting them from each other, and they were called to be fruitful and multiply and be a blessing to the world. But there was a little thing that got in the way of those connections, and that is a little three-letter word called sin. So that sin ended up disconnecting them from God, so they were hiding from God, disconnecting them from each other so that they were ashamed, hiding from each other, and actually the point where one of their sons would kill their brother, and disconnected from their purpose in the world. So what does God do? Does God give up on them? No, God pursues them. And God ends up calling people like Abraham, and will call people like Moses to bring them to a place where they're brought back into their purpose. So the law that was given to Moses as they're led out of their slavery in Egypt, they go to Mount Sinai, and in the law, God says, this is how you get reconnected. That I'm going to live in the midst of the community, and as I live in the midst of the community, I'm going to teach you to love me and to love each other, and in the process, you're going to be a blessing to the world. So that fixed everything, right? From that point on, they were connected to God and connected to each other and connected to their purpose in the world. No. So then, as time goes on, God sends who? The prophets. So the prophets come in and remind them at times when they just get caught stuck on themselves, just sort of living a life of comfort and thinking they don't need anybody other than themselves. What is the message of the prophets? The prophets remind them they're forgetting God, they're not paying attention to each other, and they're not living out their purpose in the world. So that brings us to our text for today. Our Old Testament reading is one of those prophets, Amos. Amos is basically saying, and this is at a time of relative prosperity for Israel, and during that time of relative prosperity, they're not necessarily paying too much attention to God, to each other, or to their purpose in the world. They're just living a nice, comfortable life. They're testing out all the new stuff that they just got from IKEA and all the nice new recipes that they got and all the things, and they're just enjoying life. And Amos is saying, you are disconnected. You don't even notice that your whole society is falling apart. You don't notice that the poor are being forgotten. You don't notice that you're at the point where you're just about to be taken away into captivity because you've forgotten about God. But then that brings us to our New Testament reading from Jesus, a story that Paul was talking about a rich man. And it's interesting, the description of this rich man actually looks a lot like a chief priest in the kind of clothes that he's wearing. So just like in the Old Testament, the people that Amos is talking to, he's talking to religious people. religious people that probably go to the synagogue, that go to the temple and do all their religious duties and rituals, but yet they're disconnected from God, they're disconnected from each other, and they're disconnected from the world. This rich man is probably someone who's very religious. He probably does all of his going to the synagogue and going to the temple and doing his sacrifices and doing all the right things so that he is getting everything